Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about Valentine's Day. How are your how's your holiday going? I was inspired to talk about it because I got two unexpected gifts in the mail. One of them was a Valentine's Day card from a good friend, and Dawn, who hosts Spoonie Chat every Wednesday on Tuesday for years, just for people who are called Spoonies, people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, has been a leader in the community, the health community online, and a great friend to me. And then I got this awesome gift from my friend, the wonderful, inimitable Sarah Fader, and it says, "Science doesn't give an F what you believe." And it's a thing between us. A lack of belief in science lately is could possibly the downfall of our society. I hope we can get to a point where we believe in science soon before we all die of climate change. And as an immunocompromised person, that affects me too. But anyway, back to the subject of Valentine's Day. I wanted to address non romantic love. And I think one of the most painful things we don't talk about is the breakup of friendships. And on the flip side, the joy people can derive from friendships. And so, as to the breakup of friendships, I was sometimes when you're on social media, you see pictures and videos of a friend who stopped inviting you to things. Most of the time, when a friendship ends, it doesn't end with a bang, it ends with a whimper. And my most popular article on my blog, Fashionably Ill, it's a pun on chronically ill, the name Fashionably Ill. But my most popular article on my website at www.jessicajimeno.com is an article I wrote called 5 Reasons People Abandon a Sick Friend. And it goes into those different reasons. It's been shared over 60,000 times. And I realize it's been shared because we don't talk about friendships enough and how it hurts when a friendship ends, regardless of how it ends. And one of the least discussed reasons for why a friendship ends is called Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number shows that over time, a human being can only handle 148 meaningful relationships at one time. And so when people transition to different phases of their lives, for example, moving to another job or just moving to another city, uh, you know, uh, changing schools, getting married, having kids, going to graduate school, they need to form new relationships so that they can have a stable life. And as you form new relationships, some of the old relationships fade, and people are not conscious of this. It's not an intentional thing. And so that's the reason I've had a few experiences. One that I can remember, I hadn't heard from this person in many years. She stopped talking to me after I got sick, and we were very good friends. And her parents visited me in the hospital. Her cousins visited me in the hospital, and I didn't even think they liked me that much, but she never visited me. And ran into each other walking across the street, and then we made plans to have dinner, and we had dinner. And I think sorry, my family is very loud. So it's the fact, if a relationship can be rekindled after a long absence, that points to Dunbar's number. And so, for example, if you're single and all of your friends are getting married or they're having children, those relationships, not all of them, but they can fray over time. So this church I grew up in, I was there for 19 years. And then when I stopped going there, I had to make friends with people at my new church. And so I couldn't maintain the closeness of all of those relationships from my old church. It was just impractical. And so people would write to me about that article. Lots of people, when I wrote it in 2014, and since then, they'd say, "Oh, I had a stroke. I got cancer. I have bipolar disorder. I got lupus, fibromyalgia after I had an accident." A lot of my friends slipped away. And as I talk about in my article, 5 Reasons, one of those reasons is that sometimes people love us so much that they're afraid of confronting death and the possibility that their friend could die. And so they may not be conscious of it, but they stop visiting and they stop talking to you. And of course, there are other reasons, like you may look back on a friendship, although we should judge it over the course of time, not a single moment in time. And when a person leaves, you look back, and in a few cases, you say, wait a minute, I was always giving, and that person was always taking. They were there for all the good times. They weren't there for me when we were in the trenches. And so everybody can decide on their own how they will react to that if you've lost friends. But that's up to you. I don't preach about what people should do. Again, Dunbar's number is the most overlooked reason for why friendships, with or without the presence of illness or tragedy, that they fade. And so on the flip side of that, about a couple years after I wrote that article, this friend I had for years in college, she had stopped talking to me after I got sick and I was diagnosed and hospitalized for myasthenia gravis, which is a very rare neuromuscular disease that has affected every area of my life. And when I got it at 24, I went from doing yoga 5 days a week to not being able to feel my legs. And, I've had too many doctor's appointments, was hospitalized initially. I spent 2 years in physical therapy. So all of this happened, and it was very sad that I had this close relationship, and then, she was just not in my life anymore. And then all of a sudden, after about us not talking for many years, she wrote me this email out of the blue, and she said, I'm very sorry. I I abandoned our friendship. And she said it was my fault, and I would like for us to be friends again. And we were separated, living thousands of miles apart, but we instantly became friends again. And I am so grateful that we did. And one of the things that struck me about that email was that it takes a lot of courage to apologize to someone when you haven't spoken to them in years, right? Because you don't know how that person's going to react. What if the person just ignores you, right? And you've become vulnerable. What if they're just like, no, screw you, you hurt me. And so over time, I realized that all of us are fallible and we make mistakes. And I'm, so we were really close friends again after she sent me that email. And she lived far away, but we we finally saw each other a few years after that. Twice she was in town in 2017, and uh and then in 2018 she passed away. And it's very tragic to lose somebody who's young and obviously my friend. But one of the things I take away from this about the importance of friendships is that I'm so grateful that we reconnected again, because I'm grateful that we had those, 4 years to be friends again than not have those 4 years. So, I mean, sometimes people who are healthy write to me and they say, how can I reconnect with my friend again? And so I wrote a sequel to that article called 5 Reasons People Abandon a Sick Friend. And based on the example of my friend, and I wrote this a few years before she died. I obviously didn't know that was going to happen, but I called it 5 Tips for Reconnecting with a Sick Friend. And so if you're a healthy person who wants to reconnect with someone who got an illness, perhaps you fell out of touch with that person for whatever reason, I encourage you to read it. And then even if illness isn't involved, right? Let's just say you want to rekindle a friendship because for whatever reason you drifted apart from that person. Maybe you're embarrassed to approach them. Maybe you don't know where to start. I encourage reading that article, 5 Tips for Reconnecting with a Sick Friend. And, one thing I've learned, like from the example of my friend's passing, is that, life is short. And if it's possible, and sometimes it's not possible, but if we can, if you have a friendship and you look back in life and you say, okay, this person was a genuine friend to me, and it's not like they were a taker. If you look back over the course of years and you want to rekindle that friendship, I encourage you to consider it, and, to be aware of the fact that most of the time when friendships fizzle out, it I'm not talking about if you had an argument with someone or you had a falling out, but for some reason the relationship fizzled. Most of the time, when people move on, they are not conscious of why they moved on. And so that's true even with illness involved. The person may not be aware of how a friend getting sick made them confront their own mortality. And so that's why they left. Or they may not be aware of the fact that, you know, I left this friendship because I loved my friends so much that I was scared for them when they were diagnosed with cancer, when they were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, when they were diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, lupus, fibromyalgia, or when they had a stroke, when they had a car accident. These are all the reasons people have written to me about. And, you know, the fear of loving someone so much that you leave them out of because you love them and you don't want the worst thing to happen to them is very real. I remember a couple years, so when I got myasthenia gravis in 2008, my maternal aunt also was diagnosed at the same time with stage 3 cancer. And then, after a year of chemotherapy, she beat the cancer, and we had this big celebration with our family to celebrate her 60th birthday and that she was cancer free. And then, so what we didn't know is that a few days after that, she would be diagnosed with a whole different strain of cancer. And she would eventually end up surviving that too. She's cancer free. So she beat 2 different types of cancers in 2 years. And I remember the day she was diagnosed. So the whole family was called in, and we had like 17 of my relatives. We met at this Thai restaurant that night. And so 2 of our daughters are doctors, 2 of our kids. And so we met, and I tell people this story that we prayed, we cried. Obviously, we were afraid on some level, but we also laughed. And so the anchor I've seen in our family is like we have an anchor of faith, but we also don't take life too seriously. We know how to laugh at our problems, and people think it's strange to laugh, but if you don't, if I didn't laugh at my problems, I couldn't survive having 6 illnesses, 5 of them autoimmune. And my aunt, she relies on a sense of humor. But anyway, one of my cousins said something to me, and it really gave me this epiphany. So when we were, for 5 minutes, when we celebrated that my aunt was cancer-free, because we obviously didn't know she would be diagnosed with cancer, a completely different strain of cancer, a few days later. But when we were celebrating it, so I have this cousin. He looks like a UFC fighter. So he's full of tattoos, and my mom always teases him about that because he looks scary, but he's a teddy bear, but he looks like a UFC fighter, and he has what I call a Rocky accent. So the love of combat sports runs in my family. If you like, I love boxing. I'm not as much into UFC, but I appreciate all the combat sports. Anyway, he said something to me, and I had no idea this happened. He said, "I'm so sorry." He said it in his Rocky. You have to imagine it like a big guy in his Rocky accent. He's like, "I'm so sorry, Jess. When you got sick, I came to visit you in the hospital. And then," he said, "I walked through the door, and I just couldn't see my little cousin in the hospital bed. So I went back home." And so I was like, oh, the difference, of course, with family is that the nature of my family, we have like a million family gatherings. So he would always be in my life as opposed to, a friend, right? Although that's not true of every family. But like my uncle, the patriarch of our family, he sometimes hosts family gatherings just because. Like it's no holidays, just like he's like, life is short, we should get together. So anyway, this is my cousin who's a big guy. He looks like a UFC fighter. He's bulging biceps and he's full of tattoos, and he's scared. And so I realized that if he gets scared, anybody can get scared when a friend or family member gets sick, and they can leave, whether that's for a little bit or for years and years. And so anyway, these are just my thoughts about non-romantic love. We don't talk about how much joy we can derive from friendships. And on the flip side, we talk a lot about romantic breakups, but we don't talk about the deep pain that happens when you lose a friend. And so I just want to wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day. Some of us, I don't know if you did anything. I was tired, so I spent most of the day in bed. But Just happy Valentine's Day. Leave a comment if you got a gift or a card, or you didn't. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Bye. Oh, I'm going to put a link to both of those articles below, the 5 reasons people abandon a sick friend and the 5 tips for reconnecting with 5 tips for reconnecting with a sick friend. Thanks for listening.